Welcome to the video, everybody. It's July 10th, 2026, and what you're looking at right now is the moment this entire conflict entered a completely different phase. Because for the last several months, the United States military has been hitting Iran's radar sites, its coastal defense batteries, its IRGC naval headquarters, its underground missile storage facilities, its fast attack boat fleet. All of that is military hardware. All of that is the weapons Iran uses to threaten commercial shipping. But what just happened in the last 48 hours is something fundamentally different. The US military just hit Iran's bridges. It just hit infrastructure directly connected to Iran's nuclear power plant perimeter at Bushehr. And Trump stood at the NATO summit in Ankara and looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't want to do that, but if we have to, we'll take them out." Talking about electric plants and desalination plants. So the message that just got sent to the mullahs is not a subtle one. This is not just about the Strait of Hormuz anymore. This is Washington saying out loud, we can reach every single lifeline you have, every bridge, every rail line, every power plant, every port. We have been choosing not to hit those things. We are now choosing differently. And Iran just lost a port, a railway bridge connecting them to China and Russia, 2 bridges on the road to Mashhad, and strikes landed close enough to the Bushehr nuclear power plant perimeter that Iranian officials went on state media and accused the US of striking the nuclear facility itself. It is a very rough week to be a mullah. That is the absolute understatement of this entire war. So let's get into it and break down exactly what happened, why it matters strategically, and what the targeting chain looks like that executed all of this. And then stay about 3/4 of the way through for the global roundup section, because there are big things happening in Ukraine, a heartbreaking story about a missing American sailor that I want to make sure we honor properly, and the Apache pilot's beach flyby story has a twist ending courtesy of Secretary of War Pete Hegseth that I think you're going to enjoy. Let's go. So let me set the stage for you, because the timeline here matters a lot, and I want you to understand exactly how we got from a fragile ceasefire to bridges being hit in northeastern Iran. Iran attacked 3 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz on July 7th, a Qatari LNG tanker, a Saudi crude tanker. A 3rd commercial vessel hit with drones and missiles. CENTCOM responded immediately with 80 targets hit on night 1 and 90 targets hit on night 2. 170 total confirmed hits over 48 hours, which we broke down in the last video. But the geographic expansion of what got hit on night 2 is what changed the entire strategic conversation. Because CENTCOM did not just go back to the same coastal radar sites and fast attack boat docks that they have been methodically dismantling for months. On night 2, they went northeast, way northeast. They hit railway bridges in Golestan province in northeastern Iran, the Aktake Khan railway bridge near Akala, another bridge on the Tehran to Mashhad rail corridor, and Chabahar, Iran's only deepwater port with access to the Indian Ocean, got hit hard with its control tower confirmed destroyed. And strikes were reported in Bushehr province, where Iran's nuclear power plant is located, close enough that Iranian officials went public saying the perimeter of the Bushehr plant was struck by a US projectile. And Iranian passenger train services between Tehran and Mashhad were suspended entirely because of the bridge damage. So let me tell you why each one of those targets is not just tactical, but deeply strategic. Because this is not random. This is surgical. This is deliberate. And when you understand what each of those targets represents, the message being sent to Tehran becomes crystal clear. Start with Chabahar. I want you to think about what Chabahar actually is and why Iran has been pouring resources into developing it for years. The Strait of Hormuz is a choke point, and the US military has been using that choke point as leverage throughout this entire conflict, enforcing a naval blockade, controlling what goes in and out of Iran's Gulf ports, pushing Iran's oil exports back, and keeping that economic pressure dialed up. Chabahar is Iran's answer to that problem. It sits on the Gulf of Oman, completely outside the Strait of Hormuz, with direct access to the Indian Ocean. If Iran can route enough oil and trade through Chabahar, the US blockade of the Gulf ports becomes significantly less economically devastating, because Iran has an exit that bypasses the choke point entirely. And India has been investing heavily in Chabahar, because it gives them a trade route to Afghanistan and Central Asia that bypasses Pakistan. So Chabahar has been Iran's strategic hedge, their backup plan, their way of staying economically connected to the world, even while the Strait of Hormuz is contested. And now CENTCOM just destroyed the control tower, hit the marine piers, struck the infrastructure that makes Chabahar function as a port. Iran's strategic hedge just became a smoking crater. The backup exit is closed. The economic bypass that was supposed to keep the regime funded while talks drag on indefinitely has been taken offline. And the message attached to that strike is very simple. We know what Chabahar is for. We know exactly what you were planning to do with it. And we are not going to allow you to use it to wait us out. Now let's talk about the railway bridges, because this is the part of the story that I think is getting the least attention and deserves the most. The Akut Khan railway bridge in Golestan province in northeastern Iran is not a military installation. It is not an IRGC headquarters. It is not a radar site. It is a railway bridge that sits on the rail corridor connecting Iran through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan to China and Russia. And that rail corridor has become absolutely critical to the Iranian regime's ability to survive under sanctions. Because when you blockade Iran's ports, when you strangle their oil exports, when you freeze their assets and shut down their legitimate banking channels, the one thing they can still do is put stuff on a train and move it overland through friendly territory to get supplies they need. Russia has been using that rail corridor to send cargo shipments into Iran since late 2025. China has been using it as the land link that kept Chinese-Iranian trade flowing, while the naval blockade squeezed the maritime routes. So that railway is not just a piece of transportation infrastructure. It is the economic lifeline that has been partially offsetting the entire U.S. sanctions and blockade strategy. It is the thing that has been allowing Iran to bleed slowly instead of collapsing quickly. And CENTCOM just hit 2 bridges on it. The railway connection between Tehran and Mashhad is suspended. The Golestan corridor to China and Russia is damaged. Those Russian dolls that were probably rolling in on that train, they are not rolling in anymore. The supply chain that has been quietly keeping the mullah class comfortable in their golden palaces while they stall on negotiations just got a very significant interruption. And the timing, July 8th, the night before Khamenei's burial in Mashhad on July 9th, means the rail service between Tehran and Mashhad was suspended the morning of the Supreme Leader's final burial procession. The IRGC called that deliberate. They said it was a criminal attempt to overshadow the funeral, and I'm going to let you draw your own conclusions about whether the timing of that strike was accidental. Iran's own rail authority had to dispatch repair teams and announce service suspensions on the day they were supposed to be running funeral processions for their dead Supreme Leader. That is a message delivered with Tomahawk cruise missile precision, and it landed exactly on target. And then there is Bushehr, and I want to be very careful and very precise about what happened here, because there's a lot of noise in the reporting, and I want to cut through it and give you the clearest picture I can. Iranian state media reported explosions heard in Bushehr province. A Bushehr provincial official told the Islamic Republic news agency that a military site south of Bushehr was hit by a U.S. projectile. Iranian officials then went further and accused the U.S. of striking the perimeter of the Bushehr nuclear power plant itself. U.S. officials told the Jerusalem Post that America was not responsible for those specific explosions, suggesting some of what was reported may have been Iranian air defense activity or confusion in the fog of a very complex multi-target strike night. The plant itself was reportedly not damaged according to Iran's own affiliated news agency. But here is what matters regardless of the precise targeting. Trump stood at the NATO summit and said out loud that if we have to, we will take out Iran's electric plants and desalination plants. Strikes landed in Bushehr province, close enough to the nuclear facility that Iranian officials felt compelled to issue public statements about it. Whether those specific explosions were CENTCOM or something else, the message was received in Tehran loud and clear. The power plants are now on the table. The infrastructure that keeps Iranian cities lit and Iranian water desalination running is now a stated U.S. target if Iran keeps going down this road. And that is not a small thing. That is the kind of ultimatum that changes the calculation for every Iranian official who is not a completely nihilistic hardliner, because the hardliners can ignore a lot of things. But when the lights might go out in Tehran and the water stops running, that is when the population that has been quietly suffering under this regime for years becomes a problem that the mullah class cannot manage anymore. Now, before I get into the targeting chain, I also want to flag something that the corporate media is getting completely wrong about the Bushehr nuclear power plant situation, because I think clarity matters here. Bushehr is a Russian-built facility. It was constructed and is operated by Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear corporation. It generates about 1,000 megawatts of electricity and provides roughly 2% of Iran's national power grid. And the reason the perimeter of Bushehr matters as a pressure signal is not primarily about the nuclear risk. It is about the message. The Iranian regime has spent decades hiding its most sensitive military programs behind civilian infrastructure. They put uranium enrichment centrifuges under mountains and called it civilian research. They built missile storage inside civilian-adjacent tunnels. They used dual-use facilities to blur the line between military and civilian activity, specifically to create ambiguity that makes it harder for the U.S. to strike without generating international outrage. And now CENTCOM is essentially saying, we see the game you are playing, we know where all of it is, and the perimeter of even your most politically sensitive civilian infrastructure is no longer off the table if you keep attacking commercial ships during a ceasefire. That is an enormously consequential signal. Trump's own words at the NATO summit were precise. I don't want to do that, but if we have to, we'll take them out. That is not a bluff from a commander-in-chief who just oversaw a 170 target strike package in 48 hours. That is a countdown clock sitting on the negotiating table. And every mullah in Tehran who is not completely committed to going down with the ship understands exactly what it means. Now let me walk you through how the targeting chain actually executes a strike package like this, because I want you to understand what it looks like from inside the cockpit when CENTCOM sends a concert up to Iran. And yes, I am calling it a concert. Because picture yourself as an IRGC air defense commander sitting in a bunker on the Iranian coast the night of July 8th, going into the 9th. Your radar scope lights up, contacts everywhere. Multiple vectors, multiple altitudes, speeds that do not match anything in your threat library. Because CENTCOM did not send one platform in to do this job, it sent every platform. The F-16CJ Wild Weasel goes in first. I say this every time. And I will keep saying it because the Wild Weasel mission is one of the most audacious things you can ask a fighter pilot to do. You fly in, you act as bait, you dare the Iranian radar operators to turn their surface-to-air missile systems on so you can track the radar emission right back to the source and put an AGM-88 HARM missile through the front of it. High-speed anti-radiation missile. The moment that radar operator turns his system on to look for incoming threats, he paints a bullseye on his own forehead. The lane gets sanitized before the main strike package even crosses into Iranian airspace. Then the F-15E Strike Eagles, coming behind them loaded with whatever the target set demands. 2,000-pound GBU-31s for the hardened structures, 500-pound GBU-38s for the precision work where you need surgical effects without a massive blast radius. And on a night like this, with railway bridges as targets, you're also looking at AGM-158B JASSM-ER, the extended range joint air-to-surface standoff missile that can be carried on the F-15E and launched from well outside the Iranian threat rings, flying itself to the target with enough precision to put the warhead exactly on the bridge span you want to drop. You do not always have to penetrate the threat envelope to hit a bridge. You can stand off and let the cruise missile do the trip while the aircraft stays safe outside. And then the F-18 Super Hornets blasting off the Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea are doing the coastal work, the fast-moving surgical strikes on the radar sites and the port infrastructure, the AGM-84 Harpoon for anything that floats, and the precision-guided bombs for the fixed installations. And the B-1B Lancer, 24 JASSM cruise missiles per airframe, two-ship formation gives you 48 precision standoff weapons in a single pass. Add in the naval Tomahawks from Arleigh Burke, destroyers sitting in the Arabian Sea flying 100 feet off the deck under Iran's radar coverage, and the submarine-launched variants adding another layer of standoff strike capacity. And the MQ-9 Reapers threading through the gaps in the Iranian air picture, finding the mobile targets and feeding targeting data into the network in real time. This is what full American air power looks like when it goes all in. This is not one airplane doing the job. This is a layered concert of suppression, precision strike, intelligence collection, tanker support, electronic warfare, all sequenced and coordinated simultaneously across an 800-mile combat radius. And it is running so smoothly right now that CENTCOM is posting the battle damage footage on X before the fires have even stopped burning. Now, I want to take a second here because I know some of you are going to ask the question that I have been hearing a lot lately, which is, if we are hitting bridges and nuclear plant perimeters, is this escalating out of control? And I want to give you my honest read on that. I spent close to a decade in classified vaults planning for this kind of conflict. I know what the targeting process looks like from the inside. And what I see here is not escalation out of control. What I see is deliberate strategic sequencing. You do not start a campaign by hitting bridges and power plants. You start by hitting the radar sites and the fast attack boats because those are the things actively threatening commercial shipping right now today. You establish that you can penetrate the air defense envelope with impunity. You degrade the IRGC's ability to see and respond. And then, when Iran demonstrates that it is not going to come to the table by attacking 3 commercial ships during a ceasefire window, you move up the target ladder. You hit the port that was supposed to be their economic bypass. You hit the rail bridges that were supposed to be their supply chain to China and Russia. You land strikes in the province where their nuclear power plant sits. And you say out loud at a NATO summit that the power plants are next if this continues. That is not escalation out of control. That is a very deliberate pressure campaign designed to remove Iran's strategic options one at a time, until the only option left is the deal. Every lifeline gets taken offline until the choice becomes sign the paper or have no economy left to rebuild with. That is the framework. And the book that I have been working on, you can pre-order it right now at mabbook.com. It goes deep into exactly this kind of strategic sequencing and how the same principles apply to everything you're trying to accomplish in your life and your business. The Art of Modern War. Signed or unsigned copies available. Link is in the description. I think you are going to get a massive amount out of it. And look, Iran's response to all of this is exactly what you would expect from a regime that is running out of options and knows it. Kalibaf posted on X that the era of bullying is over, and the Strait of Hormuz will only open with Iranian arrangements. The Foreign Ministry called the bridge strikes a criminal attack in a false pretext. The IRGC claimed they struck U.S. military facilities in Kuwait and Bahrain with missiles and drones. Sirens went off in both countries. The Bahrain Defense Force activated air defenses. Kuwait's army intercepted incoming threats, and Jordan reported intercepting 8 missiles fired from Iran. And here is what you need to understand about all of those Iranian responses. The Patriot missile operators and the air defense crews of Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan are stopping essentially everything Iran launches. Iran says they struck 85 U.S. military targets in Bahrain and Kuwait. The actual damage to U.S. military assets, according to everything we are seeing, is essentially nil. Their Shahab 3 ballistic missiles with ranges of up to 1,000 miles are getting shot down. Their Shahed kamikaze drones are getting intercepted. Their fast attack boats are either at the bottom of the strait or sitting in port, too scared to go out because of what happened to the 60 that got hit on night 1. Iran is firing everything they have left, and the air defense crews of the Gulf states are swatting it all down. It probably blows the IRGC's mind that they can launch 15 ballistic missiles and watch all 15 get intercepted. The technology, the Patriot system, the layered air defense network protecting U.S. assets in the Gulf, it is something the IRGC genuinely wishes they had, and they do not. And that gap in capability is the difference between Iran being able to threaten the region and Iran being able to actually harm the region. Right now, they can threaten. They cannot harm. And every strike CENTCOM makes is widening that gap. You made it to the global roundup section, my friend. So let's talk about what is happening in Ukraine, because it has been buried under all the Iran coverage and deserves serious attention. Russia just announced they want to expand their offensive into 2 additional Ukrainian regions and create a new buffer zone. So regardless of any peace framework being discussed, Moscow is telegraphing that they intend to push deeper into Ukrainian territory. And Ukraine's answer to that has been one of the most aggressive deep strike campaigns of the entire war. Overnight strikes hit Taganrog, igniting the port and an aviation college. A Ukrainian drone set Russia's Ilysky oil refinery on fire. Ukrainian drones hit Crimea again as part of a sustained campaign to systematically push Crimea into blackout conditions, and it is starting to work. This is now a 4-day Sea of Azov campaign that has hit 36 Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. 36. That is an extraordinary number, and those Shadow Fleet tankers are how Russia has been moving oil in violation of Western sanctions to keep their war economy funded. Ukraine is going after the economic engine of Russia's ability to fight in a way that is absolutely brilliant and getting almost zero coverage right now because Iran is consuming everything. But please keep your eye on what Ukraine is doing in the Sea of Azov, because that campaign is going to have strategic consequences for the Russia conflict that matter enormously in the coming months. And I also want to mention something that happened at the NATO summit that is getting buried under the Iran coverage, but that matters a lot for the long-term strategic picture. Trump pushed back hard at NATO allies at Ankara for not contributing to the Iran effort. He has been making this point repeatedly, and there is real substance behind it because the Strait of Hormuz matters to European energy security, at least as much as it matters to American strategic interests. Before this war, 1/5 of the world's traded oil and natural gas moved through that strait. European fuel prices, European industrial costs, European economic stability all have a direct connection to whether that choke point is open and secure. And right now, the United States military is bearing essentially the entire burden of keeping it open, while European governments issue diplomatic statements and watch from the sideline. Trump is right to push on this. And I think as the economic impact of the prolonged strait disruption continues to compound for European consumers and European businesses, you are going to see the political calculation in European capitals start to shift. Quiet logistical support, intelligence sharing, diplomatic backing for the U.S. position, all of that is going to become more visible in the coming weeks, because Europe cannot afford to keep pretending that what happens in the Strait of Hormuz is somebody else's problem. And then there is a story I want to make sure we cover properly because it deserves our full respect and attention. The U.S. Navy on Tuesday identified Commander Gabriel Edwards as the sailor lost at sea in the Persian Gulf after an MH-60S helicopter made an emergency water landing in the Arabian Sea on July 1st. Commander Edwards was the commanding officer of Helicopter Combat Squadron 5. He was flying with the USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group when the helicopter went down. 3 of the 4 crew members were successfully recovered. The Navy suspended its search for Commander Edwards on Sunday. And the commander of Carrier Strike Group 10 released a statement that I want to make sure you hear. He said, "The thoughts and prayers of every member of the Carrier Strike Group 10 team are with the Edwards family." He said, "While we are far from home, our heartfelt support remains at your side." Gabe's legacy as a husband, father, friend, and fearless leader will never be forgotten. We are thankful that each of us carries a unique and indelible part of Gabe's memory with us as we continue this important mission. Thoughts and prayers with Gabe's family. Hats off to a true American hero. Commander Edwards gave everything serving his country in one of the most contested maritime environments on the planet right now. We owe him and every service member deployed in that region our deepest gratitude and our prayers for their families. And then the Apache pilot story has a twist that I think is worth covering because it says something important about leadership and culture, and I have some thoughts on it. As a former commander, 2 Army Apache pilots did a very low flyby at a beach in South Carolina that got a lot of attention online. Looked incredible. Looked like an epic recruiting video, honestly. The Army moved to suspend them, and then Secretary of War Pete Hegseth stepped in and removed those suspensions. And here is my honest take on this, as someone who has been in that cockpit and who has also been in a leadership position where you have to make these kinds of calls. Apaches are trained to fly extremely low. That is literally their job. Low and fast and finding targets and protecting ground forces. So these pilots were doing something that is inside their training envelope. They were flying low and they were offset from the swimmers on the beach. And the result was footage that probably recruited 1,000 people into Army aviation overnight. From a commander's perspective, you want to say, hey, just remember there are limits, and those limits exist for safety, not for paperwork reasons. But if those pilots came back and said, "Sir, we thought about this, we were aware of our margins, we knew where the people were, we were within our comfort level, and our aircraft limitations," I would say, nice job, that was epic. And remember, the limits exist to protect you and everybody around you. Pete Hegseth made the right call, removing those suspensions. And the Army should be proud that it has Apache pilots who fly like that, because that is exactly the spirit you need in combat aviation. And that brings us to the 40 chess strategic analysis section, my friends. Because I want you to step back and see the full picture of what just happened over the last 72 hours, because it is genuinely historic. Iran's strategy throughout this entire conflict has been built on a 3-legged bar stool. Leg 1, control the Strait of Hormuz and use it as economic leverage to force the US and the world to negotiate on Iran's terms. Leg 2, route oil and trade through Chabahar as the economic bypass that keeps the regime funded while talks drag on and the sanctions pain is blunted. Leg 3, keep the rail corridor to China and Russia open through Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan so that the overland supply chain stays intact when the maritime routes are blocked. In a single 48-hour strike package, the US military kicked out every single leg of that bar stool. Chabahar struck, control tower destroyed, marine piers hit, the economic bypass taken offline. The railway bridges hit, the Golestan corridor to China and Russia damaged, the Tehran to Mashhad line suspended. And Trump standing at a NATO summit threatening the power plants and the desalination plants while strikes land in Bushehr province. The strategic message is not subtle. Every lifeline you thought you had. We can reach all of them. We have been choosing not to. We are no longer choosing not to. And the remarkable thing about all of this is that Trump simultaneously told reporters on Air Force One that Iran is calling and wanting to make a deal. He said they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago, so the kinetic pressure is at maximum, and the diplomatic door is still open. That is the art of this. You do not just bomb someone into submission. You bomb them to the table. You take away enough of their options that the calculation for the pragmatist faction inside Iran, the people who actually want to live and rebuild and have something left, the calculation tips decisively in favor of making a deal over fighting until there is nothing left to fight with. And here is one more thing I want you to think about as you process everything that happened in the last 72 hours. Trump accused Iran's leaders of being cuckoo. He said there is something wrong with these people. And I think what he is actually describing is the fundamental split personality of the Iranian regime right now. You have got negotiators in Qatar still trying to work a deal while IRGC commanders are out attacking Qatari LNG tankers. You have got the foreign ministry calling U.S. strikes a war crime, while the IRGC Navy is launching Shahed drones at apartment buildings in Bahrain. You have got Kalibaf posting tough guy statements on X about how the Strait of Hormuz will only open with Iranian arrangements, while the U.S. Navy and Air Force are methodically demonstrating that Iran has zero ability to prevent hundreds of ships from transiting that waterway under American air cover. The left hand does not know what the right hand is doing because the regime is fundamentally fractured between the pragmatists who want a deal and the IRGC hardliners who would rather burn everything down than sign something that reduces their power. And the only way that fracture gets resolved is if the cost of the hardliner strategy becomes so obviously catastrophic that even the hardliners cannot deny the math anymore. Bridges gone. Rail line to China and Russia damaged. Chabahar Port offline. Nuclear plant perimeter struck. Power plants threatened explicitly by the commander-in-chief. What part of the math are they still struggling to understand? What do you think happens next? Do you think more power plants and bridges are going to get hit? Do you think the phone call from Iran that Trump mentioned leads somewhere real this time? Let me know in the comments below because I genuinely want your read on where this goes from here. Go follow me on X and Instagram, posting there every single day as this evolves. Go to Pepperbox for the strike footage and mission breakdowns I cannot post here. Head over to maxafterburnerenergy.com and sign up for the email list. It is completely free and you will be the first to know when the energy drinks and merch drop. And go grab a copy of the book at mabook.com. Thanks so much for watching, everybody.